Hello, this is Lee Waller, and welcome. Today I am working in Unreal Engine's new 5.5 motion design tools. I'm going to take a look at recreating this motion graphic here. Let's jump in and begin. I've already set up my user interface for the most part to work in the motion design tools. If you're new to this, I have a tutorial on how I set this up. I'm going to make a few adjustments before I jump into the tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and move up here and create defaults. Click on that and then just hit spawn. That will spawn all of those assets right here: the camera, the post-process, the skylight, and the directional light. I'm going to jump down here to the sequencer and I'm going to change my frame rate to 30 frames per second. And I'm going to go ahead and set this up for a 10-second sequence. So I'm going to type in right here 300, jump out there to 300, and then I'm going to hit this little red icon right there. That'll move the end of the sequence to 300 frames or 30 seconds there. First thing I'm going to work on creating will be the ceiling, the top of this, and the floor down here. To do that, we're going to use a cloner. So over here in the motion design tools, I'm going to drop down to actors, click on that, and then go to cloner actor and double click on it. I'm going to get rid of that default cube. Just select it and hit delete. And hit delete right there. And then back over here in the motion design tools, I'm going to go to 3D shapes and I'm going to add in this cube right here. Just double click on it. And then I will make that cube a child of the cloner. And that will be the object that it is now cloning. And so with that cube selected right there, I'm going to make some adjustments to it. I'm going to expand my window out and make some adjustments so we can see this. All right, so on the mesh size right there, I'm going to set this to free. And then I'm going to change this to 75 by 75 by 10. And on bevel size here, I'm going to set that to 4. And then on the bevel number, I'm going to set that to 4 also. Let's go make some adjustments to the cloner. We'll select it. And for position on this cloner, I'm going to make some changes. I'm going to set the X to 768. And then I'm going to jump over here to the Y and set that to a -100. Then we're going to take a look at the layout right here. We're going to leave it on grid, but we're going to make some adjustments. On the X value here, we'll set that to 100. And on the Y value, we'll set that to 100. And then on the Z, we'll set that to 1. Then I'm going to drop down here to the spacing and change the spacing up a little bit. On the X, we'll set that to 100. And we'll jump down to the Y and set that to 80. And then we're going to leave the Z spacing at 105. I'm going to come back to this grid in just a moment, but now I'm going to make a few materials so that we'll have them as we work through the rest of the project. I'm going to go to the content drawer and I'm going to set up a new folder for these materials. I already have a materials folder where I was working on this previously, but for this tutorial, I'm going to go in here and right click and I'll go up to new folder and I'm just going to label this materials 2, and you can label yours whichever you would like to. And then I'm going to open that up and I'm going to make a new material. I'm going to right click and go up to material and I'm going to label this one dull white. And then I'll double click on it, open it up, and this is going to be a very simple material. I'll zoom in a little bit so we can see this a little bit better. I'm going to create the base color. I'm just going to change this hex linear to AAA DFFFF. Going to be a very simple change on that white, just a dull white. And then I'm going to hit OK. And on the specular and roughness, I'm going to set both of those to 1. I'll jump up here, hit apply, and then save that, and we can close that one out. I'm going to create a couple of more materials real quick. So back in the content drawer, back in my materials folder, right click and click on material. This next one's going to be light blue. Open it up. Now this material is going to be an emissive material, so I'm going to do a little bit more on this. I am going to drag out right here and I'm going to look for a constant. And we want that constant 3 vector right there. And I'm going to change this color right here to a hex linear 1941 FFFF. And I'm going to hit OK on that. I'm going to right click in here and type in multiply and add in this multiply node. And I'm going to connect this to the emissive color right there. I'll bring this out and then also add the output of our blue color to this multiply. And then we're going to need one more constant. So I'm going to hold down the number 1 and left click. And then we can draw this to B right here. And this will control the amount of strength we get from the emissive color. I'm going to go ahead and set this to 1. And then I'm going to apply all of this and hit save. And I'll close that out. And I have one more material that I want to make. So back in my materials folder, I'm going to right click, go to material. And this one is going to be white reflective. Double click on it, open it up. I'll zoom in, and on my base color, I'm just going to set that to white. Hit OK. I'm going to set the specular to 1 and the roughness to 0. We can hit apply and then save that one and close that out. And so we've created most of the materials we're going to need for the rest of this project. I'm going to select the sequencer and just hit Control S real quick to save everything. I'm going to go back to the cube now so that I can apply some of these materials that we've just created. Drop down here to the material properties, and right here in the primary material, I'm going to select simple. I'm going to go to asset, and then I'm going to search for that light blue. I'll select it. And so for the top material, I'm going to select asset, and then I'm going to search for dull white and select it. So we've created our floor, and I'm going to go ahead and label this cloner floor. We'll close that up. I'm going to duplicate it, select it, and just hit Control D. And so we have floor 2. I'm going to go ahead and label that ceiling. And with it selected, I'll drop down here and make some changes. And on the location here, we'll change this from a -100 to 100. And now we have our ceiling. To create the motion in the tiles, we're going to use an effector to affect the cloner. And we're going to need one for the top and the bottom for each of these. We'll set up the first 2, and then we should be able to duplicate the others. So back in our project, I'm going to go to actors here, and then I'm going to add in an effector actor. So for this effector 1, I'm going to go ahead and label that. With it selected, we'll drop down into the properties and take a look at this. Let's drop down to shape right here. We're going to leave that at sphere. We'll leave it at linear 50, and we're going to make an adjustment on the outer radius right there to 250. And under mode, we're going to leave that at offset, but we're going to change the offset. We'll go to the Z value right here, and we're going to set that to 55. And on rotation on the X value, we're going to set that to 36 degrees. We're not seeing it affect anything at this point. We need to apply the effector to a cloner. This first effector will apply it to the floor. So click on floor, and then we'll drop down to the effectors property here. We're going to need to add that effector in. So click on the plus button there. And on this drop-down menu, it'll show us all the effectors that are in the outliner, and there's only that one at this point. We'll select it. And so now you'll see the effect that it is having. So that first effector is only affecting the floor. We want one to affect the ceiling. So we're going to go to effector 1, select it, and let's hit Control D to duplicate it. And we're going to change that. So back in floor, let's select it, drop down, and we're going to remove that effector 2. So go here to the drop-down menu, hit delete. And now we'll go up to the ceiling cloner, and we're going to need to add that effector 2 to it. So click the plus button right there under effectors, and we'll go to the drop-down menu. There's effector 2. And we're going to make some adjustments to it. So back in effector 2, we'll change both of these to a negative. So -55 and then a -36. And so now those two effectors will work with our first sphere that we're going to drop in here and to animate. We're going to use that sphere as the parent and make both of these effectors a child of it, and we'll only animate that sphere. So let's head back over to the motion design tools. We'll go into the 3D shapes, and let's just double click on a sphere right there. And I made this look a little bit more like an egg, so I'm going to make some adjustments to it. Make sure the sphere is selected, and then we'll go to the scale properties right here. We're going to need to deconstrain those scale properties. We'll leave the X and Y at 1, and then on the Z, we'll set that to a 0.7. For the material on this, let's drop down to material, and we're going to use that white reflective that we created. So I'm going to go in here to the material type, select that, hit asset. We'll go for the drop-down menu right here and type in white reflective. And so we'll select on that white reflective. We'll make a few more adjustments. Like I said earlier, we want these two effectors to be a child of that sphere. So we're going to select both of those, and we'll drag them down and drop them onto the sphere. That makes them a child of the sphere. And so wherever the sphere goes, the two effectors are also going to follow. To demonstrate that, I'm going to select the sphere right there, and I'll move that. And you'll see now wherever the sphere goes, those two effectors are right with it. To add a little more life to this, I'm going to plant a light inside of this sphere so that it glows a little bit and then also casts some light on these cubes. To do that, I'll come back over here to our motion design tools. I'm going to drop down to lights, and I'm going to add a point light in. Just double click on that. It should be right in the middle of that sphere. Just to check, I'm going to jump out of the camera right here, and let me slow this camera down a bit. And then I'll just kind of move around to make sure that that is lined up. Because again, everything's been set at 0 so far. And there we have it. So now I'm going to jump back into the camera and make a few adjustments to this point light. Make sure that the point light is selected. And we do need to make it a child also of the sphere. So I'll grab the point light, drop it into the sphere, and we'll make some adjustments to it. Make sure it's selected. On the intensity, I'm going to set this to 3,745. I'm going to leave it at unitless, leave that at white. And on the attenuation radius, I'm going to set that to 200. And on the source radius, I'm going to set that to 152. The source length there, I'm going to set that to 32. So that is just concentrating that light just in this area and creating a little bit of a glow on the top and bottom of our sphere. So we can go ahead now and animate this sphere. And to do that, I'm going to grab that sphere and drag it down into our sequence. And I'm going to need to add the transform properties to this. So I'm going to click on the plus button here, go to transform, add those in. And we're basically going to animate this on the location. I'm going to go ahead and based on the animation and the way that I created it, I'm going to move my timeline indicator to 30 frames here. And that's where I'm going to start this animation. So I'll go into my location properties right here. And let's see, I'm going to make an adjustment to a couple of things here. I'm going to set key all, and then I'm also going to auto key. So I'll make some adjustments on the location. On the X value, I'm going to bring this a little bit closer. I'm going to set that to -300. And we're also going to animate the camera. So the camera will be pulled back at first. So we won't be so close on this animation at the beginning. And then I'm going to set the Y value to a -455. And that brings the whole sphere off to the left. You can still kind of seeing it affecting things right there. And so I'm going to set a keyframe for the Y property right there. That will begin our animation. And then I'm going to jump to 75 frames, and I'll come down here and type in 75. And that's where the animation is going to end for this first sphere. And so I'm going to leave it at -300, but I'll adjust this Y value to 547. And you didn't see it, but what it did is moved the sphere and the other objects over here to the right. So now we can go back to the beginning of the timeline and hit play, and you'll see that move through. We may need to make some more adjustments to that in just a minute once we add the camera in. All right, now we're going to add in the camera or animate the camera. The camera already exists in the Motion Design Outliner. We're just going to need to add it to the sequencer. So we'll go in here, open up Default Scene, and there's our camera actor 1. I'm going to grab it, drag it down into the sequencer and drop it. You'll see that it adds the camera cuts track, and there is the camera. We'll be working with the transform properties right there. Before we go and make adjustments to it, I'm going to go back over here into the outliner, make sure that it's selected, and I'm going to go into the camera settings and make some changes to this. On the lens settings, I'm going to change this from a universal zoom to a 50mm prime. Select that right there. And then also going to adjust this manual focus distance to 845. And then we'll drop on down, and I'm going to change this aperture to 1.8. And now we should be set to animate this. Over in the sequencer, I'm going to make sure that I'm at the beginning of the timeline. And again, on our transform properties under location right there, I'm going to set this. That's where we're going to be moving it. Just going to do a push in with this. I'm going to set that to a negative 1400. And we'll set a keyframe right there for that. And then I'm going to jump to 240 frames in the timeline. And that will be our stopping point for the camera. I'm going to set that then to 860. Going to jump back to the beginning of the timeline. So I'm going to push this back in just a minute because we don't want to see that at the beginning, but we'll go ahead and take a look at the motion of the animation. So I want to make an adjustment to this right here. I'm going to pull it back. I think I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I am on that keyframe with the timeline indicator, and I'm going to pull that back to a negative 620. And I believe that will have us out all the way from the beginning of the animation. Yes, we're not seeing that. We'll go ahead and play through that. And that looks good. So the next thing we want to add in is our first text, and we want to animate that. So I'm going to go ahead and let's see, I'm going to clean up here, and I'm going to open back up my motion design tools right here. And we're going to need to add a text actor in. So right here under actors, I'll double click on the text actor right there. We'll make some adjustments to this text actor. Let me open this up. There it is right there. I'm going to go ahead and label this text 1. And to make some changes to this. And so down here under text, we'll type in design. And I'm going to enforce uppercase on all of that. And I'm going to change the font. I'm going to change that from Roboto to Candera. And let's see, under regular, we'll make this bold. And then I'm going to center this up. So I'm going to change the location. I'm going to set this to a negative 300. That'll bring it closer. I'm also going to adjust this vertically right here, set this to a negative 11. And now I'm going to drop down to geometry and make a few adjustments here under the extrude. I'm going to set that to 20. And the bevel, I'm going to set that to 0.5. And I'm going to go ahead and add in some materials. For the front material, I'm going to create that with the material designer. I'm going to click continue right here. We'll go to channels and click on our base color there. I'm going to change this from texture to a solid color, and then change that solid color to white. Hit OK on that. And then I'll go into the emissive color, change that from a texture to a solid color, and set that to white. And hit OK. And we'll close that out. And for bevel and extrude, we're going to use a material that we've already created. I'll click right here and we'll search for light blue and click on that for both of those. So we'll take a quick look at this, play through. And so now we'll animate the text coming in. To animate that text coming in, we're going to use the 3D character transform properties. So let's make sure that we are on that text layer, and then we'll move to the 3D character. So right there above geometry, we'll open that up and we're going to animate it in using the scale, and then we'll animate it out using location. Let's open up scale and we'll enable that. And it disappears, and that's because of the scale progress right there. So we can move through that scale progress and see how it's animating in at this point. We want to change that so that it'll animate in behind the sphere as it moves across. On the scale begin right here, I'm going to change the X value to 0 and the Z value to 1. And then we're going to leave the scale end as is. And we're going to drop this range down to 0. And so now when it animates in, you'll see that it'll come across from the left to the right. I'm going to set this back to 0, and then let's find our location where we want this to start. So right here, about 51 frames, we'll start this. So back in our scale progress right here, we'll go to the keyframe, add that keyframe, and that adds the text actor in with that scale progress as a property that we can animate. And then let's scrub across. And it looks like right in there, we'll bring this scale progress up to 100%. So we've animated that. Let's take a look at that as we scrub through. And it is pretty well covering it as that animates in. So let's go back to the beginning of the timeline and take a look. And to animate this out, I'm going to move to a point in the timeline so that the sphere is right off the right side right here. And we will begin to animate this text out. So for that, I'm going to close up scale, go to location. We'll enable that location. Down here under location distance, on the X value, we're going to set that to 0. And then we are going to adjust the Y value. But to see that, let's go ahead and crank up our location progress to 100%. And then we'll begin to scrub this to the right so that the entire word is right off the side there. And that looks like about 330. And so now when we animate this out, it's still kind of going in the wrong direction. So we're going to need to change our location order from normal to opposite. And now we should be animating that out correctly. And so we're going to need to go into the sequencer and animate that. So let's set the location progress at 0. We'll set a keyframe right there. And then we'll move, I think, about 30 frames. So let's jump to 91 frames in the timeline, and then we'll bring that progress. And I don't know why it's not really working right here to scrub that. We can do one of two things: click on it and type in 100, or you can come down here to that in the sequence and scrub it right there. So let's take a look at that animation now. So I'm going to address an issue that occurred. I had jumped out of this level earlier and came back into it. And when I did, my material assignments on this first text were removed. And so I'm going to assign those back and then show you how to keep them. So on text 1 right there, I'm going to select it, drop down to my material properties. And so I lost the material that I had on the bevel and the extrude. So I'm going to add those back in. And it was the light blue. And the good thing about this text layer is already in the sequencer, so this isn't going to matter much. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set a keyframe for both of them. I'm not sure why this works, but it does. And so now when we jump out of this level or close out of Unreal Engine and come back into it, those material assignments are still going to be there. I'm going to hit Control S and Control Shift S to save everything. And now let's start taking a look at animating our second text and sphere. We're going to need to duplicate both of these. So first I'm going to go with the text layer and get it in place. So I'm going to select text 1 and duplicate it, Control D, and I'm going to make some changes to this. You'll see that also down here in the sequencer, that has been added in with the original animation. I don't want that, so I'm going to go ahead and select it and delete it, and we'll reanimate that. And I'm going to select text 2 and then drop down to the 3D character transformation properties and reset all of those. I'm just clicking these little reset arrows here under location and also under scale. And now I'm going to move forward in my timeline indicator to where I want that animation to start. And I think it's around about 92 frames right there. And that is my second text. Let's go ahead and change that from design to motion. That way we will know that this is our second word. And then I'm going to change the location for this. I'm going to move it away from the camera. So rather than it being at the original -300, I'm going to set that to 300. Puts it more in place where I want it. And now we can add in our second sphere. So duplicating these saves us a little bit of work. So I'm going to select that sphere and Control D. And so now we have sphere 2. Of course, we're going to need to make some adjustments to this. I'm going to go into the sequencer and take a look at the transform properties right there on location. I'm just going to get rid of those keyframes because this is moving in the opposite direction of what we want, and it's actually not located where we want it. So I'm going to delete those. And like we set the text at a position of 300, I'm going to set this sphere location at 300, and I'll bring it over so we can see it. And I'm going to check this real quick. Let me save everything. I'm going to jump out of the camera and move down there just to take a look at this real quick. And that is located where I want it. So let me go back into the camera. And I'll just scrub through here so we can see everything, set that back to 92 frames. And so that sphere is where we want it. I actually want it to come in from the right side this time. So I'm going to scrub that off to the right side right here. Let me go ahead and continue that out. So it's just right off. Actually, I need to pay attention to the effector and the cloner here so that I have nothing going on right there. And so it looks like I'll go ahead and set that to 550. It's off the right side right here. That's where we'll start that animation, 92 frames right there. I'm going to set that first keyframe. And our first animation took about 45 frames. So I'm going to add 45 frames to this for this animation. And I'm going to just select that, hit plus 45. It does the math for me and sets it at 137. And then I'll go ahead and move this on across. And then I will set both of these to linear. And then I'm going to jump back to the beginning of the timeline and just take a look at that, see how things are going. So it looks like the text may be a little too close. So I'm going to go to text 2 right there, and I'll drop its location back to about 400, which means also I'm going to need to adjust the sphere to 400. And we'll probably have to adjust that animation some too. But I'd rather this be in the right position. So right there, that animation will start and it will end. All right, so that still looks like that animation is going to work. And what we'll do now is animate this text coming in as the sphere crosses over. We do need to make some adjustments to our effectors. So when we duplicated that sphere, it duplicated everything that was a child of it also. So we now have a second point light, and we have 2 more effectors that work with just this sphere. Now, as the animation goes, I want these effectors to actually work in the opposite direction. So I will select effector 4 there, and we'll drop down to the rotation properties, and we're going to change this from a -36 to 36. And then we'll go to effector 3 right there, and we'll change this from 36 to a -36. And now the motion is going in the direction that I want it to go. So now let's animate the text. Very similar to what we did for the first text, we'll do the same for this one. So we need to bring that text into the sequencer. We'll drag it and drop it in. And in the 3D character properties, we'll work with scale first. So we'll open that up, enable that, and let's bring that progress on up to 100%. The scale order this time is going to need to be opposite. We're going to bring the scale range down to 0. And on the scale begin, we'll change this from 1 to 0. And on the Z property, we'll set that to 1. And now we can animate this. So I'm going to bring that scale progress down to 0. And we'll set a keyframe. Let me move this in the sequence probably about right there. So at 113 frames in, I'm going to go to the scale progress right here, set a keyframe for it, and then we'll move through. And let's try right there and bring this scale progress up to 100%. I'm not sure why it is not working right there, so I'm going to drop down into the sequence, go to that scale progress and bring it up to 100%. And let's see if that has it. All right, so it looks a little slow at the beginning, so we'll need to make some adjustments there. First of all, I am going to go ahead and set this to linear. That might be why. It's easing in, and we just want it to be a constant velocity. So that looks a little bit better. I think that was our problem there, and so maybe a little slow. So we'll make sure that we're not on both of the keyframes. And again, I'm going to use the plus button to zoom in just a little bit on this. And I'm going to drag that back just a little bit, maybe 2 frames to see what that does. All right, looks like we've got everything hidden there as these pop in. That end still looks like it needs to be moving a little bit faster. So I'm going to set this first keyframe. Going to bring it forward just maybe 1 frame and see how that does. All right, I think that'll work. So back to the beginning of the timeline, and we'll play through this. I'm going to click on the word label right there just to deselect everything. Now, we're going to deal with this in just a minute, but I'm going to play through and see if the rest of the animation is okay. All right, that's looking pretty good. I want to animate this out. So just after the sphere gets off the left side here, we'll start animating this text out. And so with text 2 selected there, I'm going to drop down to the location properties. We'll open that up, enable that, and we'll make some changes to this. So we'll leave the location order as normal, leave the range at 50%. The distance here, we're going to set the X value to 0. And to see where we need to animate this on the Y value, let's bring that location progress up to 100%. And then we'll drag this off to about a negative 330. And so we can bring that back in, and that's going to work the way we want it to. So now we can animate this out. So starting right there at 128, I'm going to set the first keyframe for it. And like we did earlier, we gave it about a second. So we'll set that to 158 and bring that up to 100%. And again, it's not liking that. Let's see if it'll let me type that in. So it'll work right there. And so we set that second keyframe. Let me expand my timeline so that we can see all of it. I'll jump back to the beginning and hit play. Okay, that's working. Now we do have to deal with the fact that we're seeing this right here at the beginning. So to hide this, we're going to need to add that point light in and the 2 effectors. I'm going to grab the point light first, drag it in, and drop it into the timeline. On this one, I'm going to click on the plus button for it and go to Actor Hidden in Game. And then I'm going to scroll down and you'll see visibility right here. I'm going to go ahead and check that off and set a keyframe right here at the beginning. And then I'll scrub through to just before that whole animation starts, which 90 should be fine because I believe that animation starts at 92 frames, and I will click that on. We're going to need to do that also for the sphere. So I'm going to scrub back, go back to the beginning of the timeline, and let me go to that sphere. So that is sphere 2 right there, and I'm going to click on the plus track and actor hidden in game. We'll open that up and go find that property. Visibility right there. We'll click it off, set a keyframe. Let's jump to 90 frames in, and then we'll turn that back on. And then for the 2 effectors, let me just close this up real quick so we can see our sequence a little bit better. I'm going to go over to the first effector, and you'll see that it has an enabled. Let me jump back to the beginning of the timeline, and I'll set a keyframe right there for it. Actually, turn that off. And so that is disabled right now. And we'll do the same for effector 3. We'll turn that off and drop a keyframe in for it. And then we can jump to 90 frames in again and enable both of those. Just close those up real quick. And so we'll jump back to the beginning of the timeline. And now we do not see any of that over there off to the side. And so we can hit play. And I noticed again on my text too that I've lost my materials. So I'm going to go into those also and drop down to my materials and make sure that I add those back in and add those keyframes in so that I don't lose those. So I'm going to look for light blue. And set keyframes for both of them. Okay, now we have one more text layer to animate in, and it'll pretty much be a repeat of what we've done. So I'm going to go up here to text 1 actually this time because we already have some of the animation going in the proper direction, so we may not have as much work to do. So I'm going to select text 1 and duplicate it. And there we have text 3. Just to kind of keep things in order, I'm just going to bring it up right there. And we'll also have that text 3 here in the sequencer. I'm going to open that up and take a look at the animations. We're not going to need this location animation because that is the out animation, animating that out. So we're not animating the last one out, so we won't need it. So I'm just going to go ahead, select it, and hit delete. And I will go into that text 3 to make sure that we're not going to be affected by that location. So I'm going to reset everything on it. So now before we position this text, what I want to do is make sure that with our camera animation, we have ended where we want to. So I'm just scrubbing past that last point. It should be at 240 frames right there. And so now I can set this last text in place. I'm going to try setting this at 1200 and see how that works. All right, it's a little bit large, but we'll see. Maybe that distance is good. Everything appears to be in focus, but I will check that. So with our camera, I'm going to go up here to the default scene, and I'm going to click on our camera, and I'm going to drop down to focus settings. If your focus settings are not open, just go ahead and open those, and we'll look at the draw, debug, focus right there. Click that on, and we've set it at 845 at the beginning, so everything else is in focus at that position. So what I need to do is try to position my text to make sure it's in focus based on that focus plane. So I'm going to go back here to text and the position and start scrubbing that and see if I can find, there we go. So right there we know, so 1100, we can do that. That will work. And let me go back and turn that focus plane off now. Go into the camera, drop back down here and deselect that. And that way we'll know that text is in focus at that ending position. And back to that text layer now, and we will bring this down in size so that we can fit that in there. So maybe 0.5, that looks good. And then I'll adjust maybe -6, let's see. Yeah, that works. So there's our location for our last text. We'll remember that number because that's where we're going to need to put that third sphere. So let's go ahead and duplicate that first sphere because it's animated in the direction that we want it to go. Maybe we won't have as much work to do. So select it, Control D, and there it is. And it should also be in our sequencer right here. Now what we're going to need to do is move that animation. So let's find out where we want that animation to start. I believe right about here at 150 will probably work good. So sphere 3 right there. I'm going to grab this block and I'm going to drag it down here and line it up. We are going to need to make some adjustments on that transform. Like I said, we'll go to location and that negative 300 right there, we'll set that to 1100. It should have that sphere crossing right there on that text. And just to check that, to make sure I'm in the correct location with both of those, I'm going to jump out of the camera and navigate around there and just take a look. So I will bring that back just a little bit. Let me go to sphere 3 and go to that location, and looks like around 1150 on that. That will work for that location. And then we'll go back into the camera and let's see, does that time out really well? Paying attention to the tiles on the floor and the ceiling, that looks good. Yeah, I think that'll work. So now all we need to do is animate our text in. So I'll start maybe about right here to animate the text in. So let me go find that. There's text 3, and we need this scale progress so we can move that into place also. Grab that little bar right there, drag it down. And let's just see what happens with that. A little too fast. Let's see. I'm going to zoom in to those keyframes so I can get a little bit closer. And I'll move that bar just a little bit more. Set it right there. Let's see what happens. Yeah, it's moving a bit too fast. Now, I knew something seemed a little off with that last animation. And I was experiencing some other issues. So I restarted the engine, and you can see now that that animation is off. So I'm going to fix that. And I'll bring this in a little bit. And let's see what happens with that. Okay, that is the way that it should have occurred the first time. So that's looking a lot better. All right, let me go back to the beginning of the timeline and play through this. And again, we're going to deal with hiding all of that in just a minute. Okay. All right. And I'm going to jump back to the beginning of the timeline. We're working on hiding this right here. So we'll go to sphere 3 and let me make sure I'm at the beginning of the timeline. We will add that actor hidden in game. Open that up and drop to that property. There's the visibility. We'll turn that off. Set a keyframe. And we'll go ahead and move in. Set it in at 150 right there. And so we have already hidden the sphere. So that sphere right there, sphere 3, I'll jump into there and you'll see that I added that track in for sphere 3 of actor hidden in game, adjusted the visibility there. I turned it off at the beginning, set that keyframe. Then right before that animation is going to start, I turned the visibility back on for that layer. So back in the motion design outliner, let me open that up. There is that point light. I'm going to need to bring that into the sequencer, drop it in, and go to point light 3 there, click on the plus button and actor hidden in game right there. And we can, let's see, we set that at 150. So we'll go ahead and set a keyframe for that to be on right there. And then we'll just jump back to the beginning of the timeline and turn the visibility off. Make sure that that keyframe is set. And then we'll need to do the same for the two effectors. Let me go to this effector, and we want to use this enabled option right here. We're at the beginning of the timeline, so I will turn that off and set that keyframe. Let me go to the other effector while I'm there. Turn that one off and set a keyframe. And then we can jump back to 150 in the timeline where we're enabling all of this to come back in and set that on. Let's take a look at our animation. Jump back to the beginning of the timeline. I'm going to click on the word label right there so we don't see any of the bounding boxes, and we'll play through. All right, there seemed to be a little something weird. What's going on? I saw something. Okay, that's what it is. Right there, I'm seeing that reflection. So I'm probably going to turn that text off. That is the motion text. And so just like we were enabling those other options, I'm going to go into that text layer and disable it once it gets off screen. So where is it? Right there. So I'm going to go ahead and disable that text 2. So I'll go to that text 2, go to the plus button and actor hidden in game. I'm going to set that right there and move to it. Right there, visibility. I'm going to set a keyframe, then I'm just going to jump one frame ahead and turn that visibility off. That way I won't see that reflecting off of that text layer. Okay, but I'm seeing that right there. So I'll do the same for that text layer. Close this up, and that should be text layer 1. Click on the plus button, go to actor hidden in game, just like we've been doing. And we'll move down to it. Let's see, just as long as it's out before I see that reflection. So we can set a keyframe right there, move forward one frame, and then turn that off. And then we shouldn't see that reflection. All right, that looks much better. We'll check this one more time. Play through. Okay, and there's one thing I'm going to do on lighting for this that I did in the original. So the lighting, let's take a look at it real quick, is up here in the default scene. And we have two objects lighting this, the skylight and the directional light. The directional light is really not doing anything, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. Let me select it correctly and delete that. And then I'm going to go to the skylight and make a few adjustments to it. I'm going to change the intensity to 2. And then I'm going to change this color right here. And the hexadecimal I have for that is 773CFFFF. That's that nice kind of purple, light purple right there. And you can experiment with this color and change this to whatever you want to. I felt like that was a nice looking color along with the other colors that I'm using in there. So we'll just hit OK on that. And that kind of wraps up the whole thing. Let's take a look at it. I hope this tutorial has been helpful. For more on using Unreal Engine's motion media design tools, hit the like and subscribe button.